pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now call this meeting to order. First order of business is public announcements. Details may be found at www.fairfieldme.com. Summer concerts in the park begin on June 14th. The concerts are from 6 p.m. to 7:30 each Friday. Our second order of business is public hearings, of which there are none tonight. And at this time, we will now receive a presentation from U.S. Cellular.
Thank you. My name is Bob Gashlin. I represent United States Cellular.
Can you go to the podium so that we're...
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yes.
walked right by that.
It's recorded live
Okay.
and broadcast on public access TV, so without being at the podium, they won't be able to hear you.
Okay. Okay, my name is Bob Gashlin. I'm with United States Cellular, and U.S. Cellular is in town where we're looking for a location to build a cell phone facility. And we've identified a parcel of property that works pretty well for us. And that parcel of property is on Industrial Road, and it's owned by the town. You all know the property. It's a 63-acre parcel, and I believe it's been developed for such industrial uses. And tonight what I'd like to do is just simply spend a couple minutes and go down through our proposal. Michelle said that she's distributed some information that I emailed her. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to explain what the facility is we propose. And then after that, I'll talk a little bit about what the town would get. I'll go through a couple of the key points in the leases. I won't go too deep into that, but I'll touch base on those two items, and then I'll just open the floor for any questions. And before I start, I see that the stuff that's been distributed is on 8.5 by 11, and I've got some larger maps and plans and what I'll pass out. You'll find it's a lot easier to follow one of these big plans.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I brought just enough for everybody
You're
here.
fine.
And what I'll do,
I've seen it, babe.
you have seen it,
I have
and
seen it.
I'll leave my copy with you after you go through it. So what U.S. Cellular is proposing for this property, and on the first page, the aerial, you all familiar with that parcel there? You come in off Industrial Drive, and you recognize the Department of Public Works. And talking with Michelle, it appears that a good location that y'all might consider parting with for this would be right where that old abandoned hockey rink is. And if you want to turn to the next page, we can breeze through this. This is just the overall location within the entire 63-acre parcel there. And if you would please turn to the third page. This third page is simply the legal description, the metes and bounds of two different items. Number one, U.S. Cellular proposes to lease a 100-foot by 100-foot piece of property. And as we said, that's going to be set right in the middle of the hockey rink. And you'll also see to the left and right of that 100 by 100-foot metes and bounds, we've got the access easement to the left, and we've got the utility easement to the right. And it is a practical matter, that utility easement is over Industrial Road, and it's right through the parking lot. So we just need some legal identification of how we're gonna get there. Nothing's gonna change. We're just gonna drive down Industrial, drive through the parking lot. Nobody's even gonna know about this except for, it's gonna be in the lease, and we do have legal access there. As far as the utility easement, right to the right, we just did a description of the existing poles and the existing line down there. We're not really proposing to put any additional poles in. We're gonna use the existing one. I gotta take a closer look. I don't recall, maybe when we get right up to the site, we may have to drop one, or we might go underground. We'll get to that to the next page. But in any event, this is a legal description of what we would look to legally lease from you. And probably the real thing about this is if y'all agree to move forward and we get the lease done, this page right here is actually what we take out and we attach to the lease as the exhibit. And again, legally, at the end of the day, you guys would be leasing this to us.
Nice shit.
Now, before we go on to the next page, of course, we consider these preliminary plans. We like them, we think they make a lot of sense, but moving forward, when I end up discussing it further with Michelle, there's a couple nuts and bolts that we can discuss, and a couple things may move here or there, but this is really, the crux of what we'd be looking at. So if you turn to the next page, page C4, this is a close-up of what we're proposing. And just like on the first page, the aerial, you can see where our 100-foot by 100-foot leased area, identified as that big dotted line box there, right in the middle of the hockey rink. And we're looking to lease 100 by 100, but our fenced compound is only going to be 50 foot by 50 foot. And we like to lease a little extra space just for installation, construction, if we got to get a crane in there, or we got to keep vegetation back. It's really paid dividends for us just to lease a little bit more to give us a little room to maneuver in there. So that's the general setup. You can see, if you want to look closely, at the access easement. That's with the dotted lines, and right above that, there's the smaller utility easement. Again, that's over the existing infrastructure you got there, so we're not going to be building anything or doing any earth movement or anything until we get up immediately next to the hockey rink and on the hockey rink. The next page, kind of redundant of what we just looked at. Just a more clear picture or definition of what our compound's going to look like looking straight down. Again, there's the 50-foot by 50-foot fence compound, and there's our equipment and the cell phone tower right in the middle. Pretty straightforward. And the last thing I wanted to show you was on the last page. Of course, the facility, the big piece of this whole facility obviously is the tower. A couple things about the tower. Two things. We're proposing a 195-foot tower. Couple things about the height. Two things with the height. We looked at the zoning ordinance in town to make sure that the height was legal, which it is. And secondly, from your perspective, 195 feet, the FAA does not require any lighting on such a tower. So those are probably the two big things about height. Is just a general thing, if You take a drive on Route 95 in towards Augusta, you'll see many towers, along the road there. And if you look pretty closely, you'll see all of those are lit. Those typically are 250-foot towers. And we're only looking for 195, so. And speaking of a comparison of all those towers you see on Route 95, the second characteristic of our tower is you'll see that it's a monopole tower. And these monopoles, they start out with a 60-inch base, and they taper up to an 18 or 24-inch diameter at the top. And the nice thing about the monopoles is, again, in comparison to those towers you see out on Route 95, the typical tower, those are self-supporters where they've got 3 to 4 legs coming out with lattice metalwork in the middle. And to give you an idea, the base of those are something in the neighborhood of 18 to 24 feet wide. So lots of people think, and I agree with them, that the monopoles are better aesthetically because you've got the narrower pole versus the 18 to 24-inch base that is significantly wider. So that's pretty specific as to what we're looking for facility there. The second thing I wanted to talk about was what the town would receive in compensation, et cetera, for this tower. And while I'm talking, I just pulled out the ground lease that y'all have there. And I'm not going to go through the whole lease. Just for our purposes tonight, a high level cut through is pretty good for our purposes. And of course, if y'all approve tonight, then the next step would be I would reach out to your town attorney, and we'd ferret out any nuts and bolts that he would deem necessary. So pretty quickly, the ground lease. First of all, one thing I'll point out, if you notice in the first paragraph, it says Town of Fairfield is the landlord, and Maine RSA number 1 Inc. is the tenant. And I wanted to point out, Maine RSA number 1 Inc. is a subsidiary of United States Cellular in Maine. And if you go pull any lease that U.S. Cellular does in Maine, probably 90% of them are Maine RSA number 1 Inc. And I should have brought a Secretary of State document with me, but U.S. Cellular definitely is one and the same. So these ground leases are pretty standard in the cell phone industry. So a lot of these terms that we're going to be talking about is they're standards. Basically what we're looking at a lease that totals 30 years. And the reason why these leases go so long, before I get into that, you're going to find that in the industry, you'll see some of these leases up to 50 years or so. Just 30 years seems to work for U.S. Cellular and most of the landlords. We look for a 30-year lease. We look to start the rent at $1,300 per month, which is what we found in the state of Maine that we can get these leases done for. We certainly could have come in, and maybe I should have come in and started saying, these leases go for $1,000 and, leave room to wrestle a little bit on pricing and everything. But $1,300 is what you're going to find out there that these things go for. We also Michelle and I discussed annual increases to the lease. We were discussing 2.75%. And I believe I submitted in our application, or our submission package, a little schedule showing what the total payout if this lease goes to 30-year term. And that was what I believe was $712,000 after 30 years, give or take. This property will be taxed. We find typically that these things get assessed for $150,000 or something like that. So the town would see, you know, typically what, $2,500 in tax income per year on that. Couple other items, bear with me one moment, please. U.S. Cellular's fully insured. U.S. Cellular is responsible to pay property taxes, as I said. U.S. Cellular is responsible to maintain this site. The lease also has a provision for at the end of the lease, or if the lease terminates prior to the 30-year end date, U.S. Cellular is responsible to remove the facility and restore that space to its original condition as close as it can as possible.
I have a question for you.
Well, good. I think that's basically my whole presentation. So, sure.
If we do decide on that, are you proposing to also have some sort of security mechanism in place, like night vision cameras and things like that, so that your property doesn't get vandalized? Because more often than not, vandalism happens more in the evening than it does during the day. But, you know, day cameras are good, but night cameras are even better. Are you planning on doing that?
We proposed the standard security measures that you're going to find on almost 100% of the cell phone facilities, and that is we're going to install a chain link fence. We're going to put barbed wire on the top, and we don't really, although there is some vandalism, things are trending away from that. We had some things where people used to bust into these all the time for those copper grounding bars.
Absolutely.
I mean, they were only worth like, you know, $60 a pop, but people would come in and rip those off. And, you know, we've done things like put the grounding bars in different locations to, you know, to inhibit that. But I'm going off on a little tangent here. But, you know, the answer is we're proposing the standard security measures.
So standard is not involving night vision
Nope.
cameras?
No night vision. And to my knowledge, I don't, I've been doing this for 22 years, and I don't know of any site that does have night vision, you know, so.
I do have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
So if we do ultimately approve this contract and you begin construction on this project, how long do you expect that construction to last?
Right, good question. And I neglected to do a wrap up by saying a couple things leading to that. So as we envision the process, and of course, you know, it's not my job to envision. I mean, it's your process. But typically, what happens when we work with towns is you guys vote whether you want it or not, and if you do vote, you know, for this, the next step would be for me to reach out to the city attorney we would negotiate this lease. We find that a typical time frame to get this lease wrapped up, it's a pretty friendly lease. There's not a lot of stuff in there to negotiate. It's more business terms, that we would discuss with you. And we can negotiate this lease in a month, 6 weeks or so. Once we get that negotiated and we get it signed by both parties, the next step is, I would go in front of the planning board for zoning and get the permitting all approved. As I mentioned, this is a legal use on this site pursuant to a conditional use permit. And by the way, one good thing about this process is I'm actually the person who would negotiate the lease with your attorney, and with the planning board, I would come in and I would do the zoning piece as well. So that brings us to your final question, construction. US Cellular does not put these on their construction schedule until we get the building permit in hand, because it's just difficult. That ties up a lot of money when we don't really know what's going to happen with the planning board. We're very positive because it's a legal thing. We got a good application, no lights, it's an industrial area, seems to work out there. Looks like zoning would be a pretty positive experience, but you never know. So having said that, we're not going to put it on a construction schedule until we get our permit. And there's a couple things involved in that. If we get our permit and it's September and snow's ready to fly, we get our contractors ready to go, we might have to wait till, months after that. Mud season, we don't want to do that. Maybe we might have to wait, 8 months, etc., until we start construction. But one thing about that, the lease, I hope I'm not going too deep into some of these terms, but the lease gives us the option to hold off. We have up to, in the lease, the standard term is we have up to 18 months from the time it's fully executed to construction. And of course, that's because of all this stuff we're talking about. Got to zone it, got to plan construction, we got to start construction. That's when your rent starts. And we have 18 months to do all that, or the lease is over. That was a long question, or a long answer for your simple question.
So actually, I guess my question is possibly a little less involved in that. Is that, as you may have noticed when you were citing this, this industrial road certainly is an industrial zone, and to the extent that as long as your project complies with the existing ordinances, I wouldn't foresee any problem with it. But in terms of judging the sort of wisdom of the use of public land and getting that information, you may have noticed there's also a substantial use for recreation by the sports fields and stuff that are behind this zone. We often talk about the problems of having an industrial road feed into a recreation area, and what I really want to know is, for once you start the construction, for how long are we looking at having construction materials and large equipment and trucks going up and down the same roads that kids might be walking down to go to a baseball game?
A construction typically takes 12 weeks, okay. And this is an easy one, just because we don't have to go and do grading, we don't have to build a road, we don't have to build utilities. We just go and scoop up the hockey rink, bring in some dirt, smooth it out, put our infrastructure in on top of that. So we'll say 12 weeks.
I have another question when he's
Sure.
answered. Not far from where, if all of this does happen, there is wetland that is around that area as well. And I was just wondering, has there been any testing of you know, when these things are put up, we all know that sometimes large birds go into wetland areas and they get on top of things like that and build nests and things like that. And of course, when you have wetlands, you have a lot of birds that come into that, you know, area. You have all kinds of different animals that come in there. And that would be one of my major concerns,
Sure.
that it would disturb the natural surroundings as far as the animals that go in and out of there.
Good question, and I believe that's a question that's in your ordinance as well. You know, if we come in to do the conditional use, there's always, you know, wetlands items in there. And if you turn to page C4,
That's where I am.
okay, and you'll see right to the right of the area that we're talking about, you'll see that there's some wetlands
I do.
items there, and you'll also see, and excuse me, this is early on in the process, I haven't become totally intimate with this, but there's a footnote directly at the bottom. Audra Klum Environmental came in, we sent her out here to do a wetlands delineation. So she went out, she pinned where the wetlands are, she pinned where the wetlands end. We transferred, you know, her field work to these plans, and so we've had an environmentalist come out and clearly delineate what you're asking about.
So, basically, what we'd be looking for this evening, and I don't need an official council vote, because that's not what's on here. Really what we want to do is make sure that this was a project that the council was ready and willing for us to look into, to negotiate the lease with the town attorney, go forward on all those pieces, so then when everything is done, we'll bring it back for your formal discussion and voting pieces. But until we went forward and did any of that, knew that it would be best to have Bob here discuss this issue with you, and then we could go forward before we invest any more time and money in the project. As I've mentioned before, we've discussed with PAL about the removal of the hockey rink, which they clearly were planning on having removed anyway. This year it has fallen into disrepair, it hasn't been used in the last couple of years. And part of your discussion when the lease is finished and the fees that we'll collect from this will be some ideas about what we'll do with that revenue and how we can potentially use that to create either a new rink in another location or some various pieces with that, some ideas that we've been floating around, because staff and I have had a lot longer to think about this project than the council has, but just basically looking to see what everybody thinks and whether we should go forward and start working on putting in an official document.
I think for that, and I'll just ask just for a quick informal poll by show of hands. Are we interested in having Michelle continue to work on this project? All in favor? Any opposed? And any abstaining? There's none. So for now, you are approved to go ahead and continue working on this project pending final consideration of whatever comes of it.
Great.
So could I have an easy question for you? So yeah, I appreciate the vote. So as for me to report back to United States Cellular, when do you anticipate the formal vote allowing Michelle and I to really start working on the lease and go through the attorney?
So
or was this
this was it, pretty
Okay.
much. We didn't need an actual formal. I have the ability to work with the town attorney on these bits and pieces. So we'll go forward and get that done. So we can quite frankly start with sharing emails and contact information with attorneys tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So we can go forward and do that.
So I'll just send you an email in the morning, and you've already got a copy of the lease.
I have everything,
And I'll just make sure you have my contact information, and I
Yeah.
would,
and I think I have all of that too, so
okay,
we can do that, and we'll make sure we'll loop in the town's attorney, which is William Lee out of Waterville.
okay,
And, yeah, I don't anticipate that it's gonna take very long at all,
okay,
quite quickly.
Good.
And so it may potentially be feasible that by council's first meeting in July, I would think, which would be 4 weeks from now, that we may very well be able to get this back on here for some more
good,
formal pieces, so.
Good.
That should be good.
great. Well, I appreciate your time, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. The third order of business is public comments. Members of the public may speak to the council on any item or reserve the right to speak on a specific item that is on the meeting agenda when the item is addressed. Anybody from the public who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to the fourth order of business, reports from staff and committees. We'll begin with the town manager's report.
So first of all, I'm gonna combine the Economic Community Development Report with my town manager's report, because that's my first item. So Economic Community Development Committee was supposed to meet June 4th. The meeting was rescheduled due to lack of a quorum, so we met on the 10th, which was this past Monday. They did approve a new facade application for IBEW, it's 1253 Properties, which is actually the brick building located closest to the bridge as you're going down Main Street here towards the light where the offices for the electrical union is housed. It's a repointing project, so that was actually approved, and if you notice, scaffolding was actually installed, I think, yesterday. So they're moving right ahead with that project, as well as 2 marketing applications, one for Meridians and one for Belangers. So these 4 projects that we've now approved, should they all come in within what their budget ranges are, is pretty much going to be all of the $30,000 we set aside for this project 2 years ago. So it was great that we've had these applications, and once we know exactly where everything's going to land, what we'll probably be doing is looking for an additional request for the 2019-2020 year to come from our TIF districts, but we're still working on the finishing touches for that request. And then also some really exciting news. This past Monday, Governor Mills signed the legislation that will move our PEG station from channel 1301 back to channel 11 or 7. So that's really good, puts that down in the basic pieces. So once the legislation goes into effect, they need to move us back within 60 days. So that will be coming soon, and we'll be working on a advertising campaign for that.
I assume that was not passed with an emergency header, so we're looking at 90 days after the adjournment of the
Yeah.
legislature to begin a 60-day clock.
Yeah.
So it'll be probably 5 or 6 months at
It
the
will be.
minimum before that happens.
It could be. We haven't really heard. Another little piece, though, just as a heads up, I got wind from quite a few residents in the last couple of days that Spectrum has realized that they were undercharging for franchise fees in the community of Fairfield. So folks are probably going to see some increases in their bills.
I already did.
When I contacted Spectrum to find out what had happened, because I knew nothing had changed, residents were being told that the rates changed because the town said so when they called Spectrum. So we wanted to make sure we got some clarification. So franchise piece has always been a piece, and they did discover that they were not charging the appropriate rate. But from what I've heard, increases in some bills went from $1 something to $7.50.
Or $6.
So for some folks, it could be a substantial change because of their error, but we have done nothing different. There have been no new agreements, nothing's changed. The lawsuit was settled multiple years ago. They simply have found that it was an issue in their accounting errors. But I'm still gathering information from folks if they notice a really big difference, to come and talk to us so we can make sure that it's still falling where it's supposed to.
To that end, is there any possibility that we could perhaps try and put some life back into our incredibly moribund franchise fee negotiations?
Yes, that is definitely where we're looking to go to next. So a lot of it was waiting on, there was a lot of legislation that was up this session regarding public access TV and cable companies and some franchise fee stuff at the federal level. So a lot of folks were kind of waiting for that to get flushed out before we went forward. But yes, we're hoping that within the next 6 months, we'll hopefully have a really good start on some new negotiations, so, which will be a good piece. And then also on the 11th, which was yesterday, we had a KV-COG Board of Directors meeting. They passed their budget for the next fiscal year. And then last night, the First Park Design Review Committee met to review plans for a new 5,000 square foot plus square foot building that is looking to go into the park, which is really good. So the park is continuing to grow. And just so everyone is aware, we did receive our revenue check from property taxes last week in the amount of $22,443, which is a $677 increase over last year. And I went back and I did some comparisons. So this revenue check, in comparison with what we pay to First Park, represents 63% reimbursement, as opposed to 10 years ago when it was only 37% reimbursement. So I know a lot of people think that the park's not doing anything, but it actually is growing, and it's continuing to grow. So we're hoping for some more activity in there. And then also Public Works has been working on installing the new gas vents and removing the old non-functioning vents at the closed landfill this week. They hope to have that wrapped up hopefully by tomorrow. So that'll be good for the solar project. And then we're getting a lot of requests regarding the paint for streets, on the streets with crosswalks and parking. That is on our list within the next week or so to get started on, weather permitting. We can't paint when it's raining and the ground needs to be dry, but we are aware of it and it is on the list of things to do soon. So the crosswalks have become a concern, so we're working on that.
One more question on Public Works. Over the weekend, there was some discussion on Facebook about a sinkhole on Woodman Avenue, and one of our police officers actually managed to get out ahead of that situation. Has that been looked into?
Yes, so that was addressed immediately first thing Monday morning. What happened with that was, what we've traced it back to is that 3 to 4 months ago, evidently there was a water main break. And the water main, when that broke, that water is what eroded underneath. So it's been temporarily fixed, but it's actually the water district that will be doing the main fix. But yes, that was addressed. So, and hopefully folks understand, one, even though Public Works isn't here, and if they're not on duty at that time and you notice an issue, calling 911 has the same effect, because they have the ability to dispatch to them in an emergency. Fortunately, nobody was hurt in this instance, but certainly at any point in time, if anyone should see a sinkhole, they should contact 911 immediately.
Yeah,
because especially when asphalt's involved, you never really know how much is actually eroded underneath.
How deep it is.
And how deep it is. So clearly, contacting 911 is the biggest thing that we can tell folks if you see anything and any issues with our ditches or roads or that sort of stuff. And we can get folks on that immediately, but it did get addressed. So.
Thank you.
One more thing, sorry, just as a quick update for you. I did receive some information from the superintendent today regarding the election that was held yesterday and the failure of the school budget. We wanted to make sure that some information was put out that was what is going on with the board. The school board members have not met to officially approve this plan. But it has been verified as a plan through the school's attorney as what their legal course of action needs to be. It's the date pieces, the dates that are in this announcement that I'm about to read to you are tentative until that group meets. But because the budget has failed, Articles 1 through 15 must be resubmitted through the budget validation referendum process. The board must call a new a district budget meeting and referendum and sign the necessary warrants. The posting process is the same for the warrants as the first time around, so that's a 7-day legal required posting ahead of time. Then the district holds the second budget meeting for voters to approve the new budget for submission to the validation referendum. Then the second validation referendum is held on that budget. Articles 16 through 19 are not considered part of the operating budget. These were finally passed at the budget meeting and are not submitted for the new review process. As such, only Articles 1 through 15 go through the repeat process. They have a plan to follow a tentative schedule for the above, but it is tentative as the school board has not taken a vote. But their plan at this point is Monday, June 17th, a special school board meeting to consider voting results and discuss the new budget. Thursday, June 20th, the board vote on the revised budget, created documents and warrant. Tuesday, June 25th, school board meeting. Board signs the warrants and notices to call a second budget meeting and second referendum. Wednesday, June 26th would be the posting of the warrants and the notice to call the budget meeting. They're considering holding the budget meeting on July 9th and the budget validation referendum on July 23rd. And again, those dates are tentative until the school board meets. But it is something that they are working on, and updates will be forthcoming as they are finalized.
This time I'm going to recognize the town clerk to give a report on the election that happened yesterday.
So for the 1849 school budget validation referendum election, out of 4,339 registered voters, a total of 243 registered voters attended and cast ballots at the polls. That's a turnout of 5.6%, so it was very low. The total of absentees that were requested, facilitated, and cast was 7. We had 4 new voters and 3 spoiled ballots. So the notes for this election, the attendance was exceptionally low statistically when you compare it to other elections that were similar. The deputy registrar continues the physical file update of the voter cards, and there was a power outage between 2 and 4 p.m. at the polling place, and we immediately had the occupants stay in place while we opened up the side doors to provide lighting, to keep everybody safe, no trip hazards or bumping into our equipment. All of the staff stayed with their stations to make sure that the ballots were secure. And we guided voters accordingly, allowed them to use the lighting from their cell phones as opposed to phone calls prohibited at the polls. And the preservation of the integrity was maintained. I did not have to reach out to anyone. Public Works, Fire Chief, Police Department, and the town manager, they were on it. They got right out in front of this. They brought me lights. Michelle brought me flashlights. We got temporary lighting. We had a contingency plan in place depending on how long the outage might occur. We did shut down the tabulator, which was running on battery backup, so that Michelle pointed out if we had a power surge, when the power came back on, it could fry the machine and our data. So we powered that down in accordance with the Secretary of State's guidelines, and used the provisional auxiliary provisional ballot box. The procedure was followed correctly and immediately implemented. And during that period that we didn't have power, 34 voters cast ballots. And upon the return of power, we were able to cast the ballots through the tabulator in accordance with procedure and the proper process. And there were no hand count ballots for this election. The immediate initiative to provide assistance for the voters and for the personnel, it was greatly appreciated by everyone. So I did want to say thank you, and just, they were thinking about it before I even could think about calling them. So well done to everybody, and that is my report.
Thank you. And thank you to you and your staff for
You're welcome.
another successful election.
My pleasure.
Especially in light of the difficulties.
Well, it wasn't in light.
All right, the 5th order of business is to waive the reading of and accept the minutes as printed or amended for meeting number 2019-10 held on May 22nd, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? And that motion carries. The 6th order of business to approve the treasurer's warrant 73 in the amount of $615,358.53.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. 7th order of business to take action on the following items of business. Item number 19-51, order that the town council hereby appoints Jack Stanley Jr. as Kennebec Sanitary Treatment District Trustee for a 3-year term to expire on June 30th, 2022.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? That motion carries. Item number 19-52, order that the town council hereby appoints Richard Bryant, Garvin Donegan, Michael Duguay, Timothy Forsman, and Elizabeth Fortin to the Technology Committee for a 2.5-year term to expire on the date and time of the town council organizational meeting in January 2022.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? That motion carries. Item number 1953, order that the town council hereby waives the $100 a day civil penalty assessed to William Sturdivant regarding Sanderson Drive pending the Somerset County Registration of Deeds filing of the amended subdivision and land transfer to Reginald Gammon and receipt of $6,457.06.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
So motion and a second. Is there any discussion? And just for clarification, for people who might be following this, this is the matter that we had discussed 3 meetings ago now. And we had, it seemed to be the sense that the abutting properties wanted to get this done. The new owners would like to be out from under this, and it was originally our intention to compel somebody who is now deceased to take action, and so obviously that is not going to happen, so.
So, and when we discussed it last, there were to be attainable goals that we knew and that could be verified.
Yes.
So, the individuals who are looking to purchase this property have provided us with signed right-of-way maintenance agreements with the abutters. One of them dealing with, lists out the land transfer that would go to Mr. Gammon. Has also had the gravel that's there in the road that was previously constructed verified by an engineer as to whether or not it meets our standards. So that has been done. So they have also been to the planning board to amend the subdivision, which has also been done, was done the first Monday of this month. So the only things that are left were the actual 3 items that are here, which will not take place until the actual closing. So instead of having the closing done and then everything else go forward, we felt that this was the best way for us to handle it, so that as soon as their closing is finished, we can go ahead and discharge the piece for the fines and receipt the money for our legal fees. Because this does, the $6,457.06 is all of the legal fees that the town had expended when this was originally created. All we're doing is waiving, like you said, the $100 a day civil penalty, which is not going to ever be collected at this point from the gentleman who is unfortunately no longer with us.
All right. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? And that motion carries. We move on to the 8th order of business, council workshop and other business. Item number 1 is to discuss the Crossroads-TV budget.
So, we're at the point in the year where our 2 enterprise funds need to have their budgets approved for FY19 and 20. Last year, when the Crossroads-TV station was created, the budget entries were simply estimates, which are details in front of you of what we thought we might spend between the course of our year. The largest amount of our expenses for the course of the year, of course, have been the new equipment purchases that we needed to do for our station. So we have spent to date $73,526.64 from our Time Warner Cable settlement for all of our equipment purchases. Things have worked out quite well. And at this point, the budget projections for 1920 look as though our expenses, which includes 1 full-time staff member plus benefits and all of the department's costs, at $88,470, but our revenues being the franchise fees and the taping fees received from municipalities and organizations being at $93,500. So that, right now, the station is projected to generate more revenue than we are projected to have for expenses. They're still in the designated revenue accounts for the station. Currently, well, as of 6/3, the remaining balance that we had after everything we've spent this year is still $135,036.18 is what's in that account. And this works very similar to, the station budget works just exactly as the sewer budget does, so that these funds do not go into our undesignated fund balance. That's the general fund that runs the town pieces. These departments have their accounts, they continue to roll every year, and are managed in that way. And they're designed so that their revenues that they collect pay for their expenses that they generate. So.
Anyone have anything else they want to add about the budget or any other questions?
I
And-
think that he's doing a pretty good job running the station. That's all
Very
I
good,
really have to say
very good.
about it.
When do we need to implement this budget, like get it passed? And ready to
So
go?
if, what I was hoping to do, this as well as the sewer, which we'll discuss next, would be bring them back to you for approval at your next council meeting. That's in plenty of time, as it'll be done before the fiscal year starts, so
Okay,
that works.
so,
And if
since
anybody has any questions between now and then, feel free to.
there doesn't seem to be any major questions on this, I will say that should go ahead for our next agenda. So the next item is to discuss sewer use rates.
Your next item really should be done in tandem with the item after that, which is the sewer
In
budget.
that case, just discuss the sewer budget and usage as a whole.
So the budget has been put together for the next year. Let me see how this is in my packet here. There we go. So for the next year, the sewer department is looking at having expenses of $609,805. That includes town office clerk and half of a sewer mechanic, and their benefits and the expenses for the department. Major expenses within the department are actually our bond payments, which the bond is funded 50% through taxation that we vote on when we vote on debt service. But our bond payment principal is up this year from $178,960 to $186,145. It's a $7,000+ increase, but interest dropped, so we have a loan where it increases in an opposite fashion. So interest will be $21,310. Also, we have to pay KSTD for all of the waste that the town generates that we ship to them. That's projected to be $206,310. That's a $16,878 increase. That is our current rate that we've already been sent. The KSTD works on a different year than most folks do. They actually run a April 1 through May 30. So we already know what the first 3 quarters are going to be in the next fiscal year, but we don't know what the last quarter is going to be for our billing cycle. So we added 5% to a quarterly rate to adjust for rate increases. And those are really, KSTD and the bond is really our 2 major increases for the year. But what it does do, based upon current revenue projections, and the current rate structure, create a $921 shortfall. Now, that being said, if you look at our revenue projections, that would be as if we raised $485,000, which last year we projected we would raise $492,100 in fees. Well, part of what we've been doing the last year for the sewer department has been our stormwater control and what they call combined sewer overflows, which is when stormwater and the town sewer system that goes to the treatment plant are combined. Stormwater typically would go into a catch basin and be discharged into a water body because it's simply rainwater and groundwater. But when you have them combined, it increases the amount of water being treated at the treatment facility. That doesn't necessarily need to be. So as we've tightened up those pieces, one of our biggest items that we had that contributed a substantial amount of stormwater was actually the dam in Shawmut. And because of our negotiation with them and our work with them and some changes that they've done with their processes, it's decreased the amount of water that they are sending into our system, which is perfect. That's exactly what DEP wants us to do. But because they've limited and cut back the amount that they've put into our system, they've also cut back the amount that they're paying for. So that has created a large piece in what our revenue shortfall is. So while we had projected $492,000 for this current fiscal year, it appears we're only going to bring in $475,000. So the need for $485,000 for next year means we would not be able to obtain that with our current rate structure. So what I had sent out to council was the possibility of looking at some various different pieces in rate structure. And 2 years ago, in 2017, when we had raised the rates, we had thought probably we were going to have to continue to raise the rates every year. Well, last year our KSTD portion dropped, and we thought that we would be stable enough to raise absolutely everything that we needed to without a rate increase, and a rate increase was not done. But based upon current projections, we don't believe that that's possible. So I would be recommending a small rate increase. It's not substantial. So for a quarter, we're currently at a $58.40 minimum charge for the quarter, and looking at changing that to $63.50 per quarter. So that's $5.10 per quarter, or roughly $1.70 a month. Folks with consumption would see that $5.10 increase, but then anybody who does over 1,000 gallons would go from $3.80 to $3.80 to $4 per 100 cubic feet over that. So which relates to an additional $1.77 per month for an individual. Our number of users have increased, which is good. We've been doing an awful lot of work at making sure that accounts that were not necessarily using water are still in our system. What had happened before was folks, if they were bankrupt properties and the banks had foreclosed and they sat vacant, even though they're still hooked to our sewer system, they still need to pay a ready-to-serve fee, and those fees we were not charging those. So we've been going through the process of cleaning all that up and getting that fixed, as well as folks who went to Florida in the winter were not being charged anything for still being hooked in with a ready-to-serve fee because they weren't receiving any water. So we're making sure now that there's a clear mechanism to verify, even if there's no water bill, that the bills are definitely going forward. So, and verifying those pieces. So that's where we're at with, and that's why I said these two needed to be done in tandem, because depending on what your budget looks like will determine what your rate structure should look like. So.
Anyone have anything they want to add to that?
Not me.
Just one more thing that I didn't mention. So basically, the budget, the way it was presented, required us, we needed to raise an additional $31,708.08 is where we were at. And, or 80 cents, sorry. My decimal point's in the wrong spot. This new rate would raise $33,048.80. So it is slightly more than what we were required to raise, but just simply because that's the way the math works out, but it's not a lot more. So it is one of those things we will have to continue to monitor as we go forward, so to make sure that we're staying in line of where we are, but we're not raising rates so substantially, so to say that we don't have to look at them again in the next 4 or 5 years. I did recently find that Winslow has risen rates to $30 a quarter. So it was a $30 per quarter increase is what the town of Winslow did, because a lot of us, sewer rates have been a long-term problem for a lot of municipalities, and folks are aware of that. And we're trying to correct those pieces, but without doing huge jumps in any given year, and to do it in small incremental steps. I also received an email the other day from a municipality that was requesting a grant, and they actually were denied the grant because their rates were too low, because they were not funding properly their department. And we've actually had written documentation in the last couple of years from DEP stating the same exact thing to us, that our rates were not where they needed to be to properly maintain our system. So this would keep that in check as well.
I think I say this every time the sewer budget comes up, and especially since we've had to start on this path of rate increases, solely because we have become more efficient as a community at how we use water. I do think that it is a perverse system that essentially financially punishes a community for conserving water. And while I understand that there's nothing that we can do about that around this table today, I really do hope that the officials that we send to the bodies related to our water use will keep in mind that we really ultimately have to have a better way of doing this, so that communities who are doing the right thing and solving problems and conserving water aren't turning around and paying through the nose on their sewer bills because we did the right thing.
Right.
And I think that that, to me, not the rate increase itself, but just the morality of turning around and telling the residents of Fairfield and our businesses, who have done an admirable job of bringing us in line with the environmental standards and the expectations, to say, oh, but now that you've done that, here's the bill for your hard work, I think is a little bit much. And really, I'm hoping that Sewer District will take a look at why that happens, because it is absolutely appalling to me in an age when more than ever we need to be conserving, that we get billed for doing.
So one of the things that hopefully will come back to us out of this process, so typically our price that we pay to KSTD is based on multiple factors, but one of the biggest things is the fact that it is a 3-year average. So what will happen is eventually the decrease in the volume that we are sending there hopefully will catch up to us, and therefore we will decrease our cost to KSTD. But until that time frame happens, we need to get there. So like last year, there was a slight dip in our KSTD fee because of the 3-year average changed, which is why we didn't need to raise rates. And if we continue decreasing and our average continues to drop, then hopefully our rates will be able to maintain. So.
Any further discussion on this point? Seeing none, I'll move on to item number 4 to discuss the personnel policy.
So do you want this to come back to you next meeting as we set forth
Yes.
for the previous one? Yeah,
so
the budget and the rates.
What people want to do, bring it back next meeting with the budget and the rate at the 63.40 with the base rate?
Yes.
Okay. I'm
Okay.
not hearing any objection to that, so
All right,
we'll
good. All right.
assume that's how we're going to move forward for now.
Okay. So the personnel policy has needed some adjustment for a while, and fortunately, our HR director just recently went to a large training, and some of the items that are in here had come up during that training, and they were things that we didn't address at all. So it seemed like the appropriate time to take care of that. There is some clarification regarding employment applications and how that process would work. There is there is a lot of pieces where it simply changes in some locations the name of town manager to HR director, because that's actually who handles it, and it's not there. So that's just why those are there. It doesn't, we're not changing our practices, it's just changing the policy to reflect what we were doing. There is one piece, though, in the type-up under Equal Opportunity Employer, under Article 3, which is on page 8. With the changes that were being added, which is just all of the protected classes, the one that is missing, when this got typed up, when I transferred this over, is age. We're gonna add the word age before gender. That's all, and it was supposed to be there to begin with, I noticed it when I was going back over it the other day. We've defined the access to personnel files, and again, that's just a matter of clarification as to how that works. The question has come up, Article 17 on employee benefits regarding the health insurance buyout piece. This is actually coming up all over the state. And the request, one is a correction to this because we don't pay the buyout monthly, we do pay it weekly. It's broken down in a weekly amount. So that was just to clear that. And it's, but what we're paying for a buyout is relatively low as to what some municipalities are paying. We actually budget the full amount for folks. But, so that was a piece to discuss as to how that goes. It's just a comma. Some of them is just grammatical. Couple of we needed to clarify our alcohol and drug policy, so to take into account the legalization of marijuana and how that needed to work. Oh, I skipped one. And also a new article that was brought up during the HR Director's training on page 29, which would be political activity and what staff are allowed to do, and staff are allowed to use town resources for. Basically, more to the point, what staff are not allowed to do and not allowed to use town resources for as a member representing the municipality. It does not restrict what their ability is of their own personal time and their own personal resources, just the municipalities.
So, on that, that section, I do want to, just, I guess for my own clarification, obviously it says, to use the influence of his or her employment capacity for or against any candidate for any county, state, federal, or town elective office. I agree with that in principle. I guess my question is, so say for instance, there was a candidate or an issue that directly affected, you know, reasonably was foreseeable to affect, say, the way in which firefighters are going to do their job. Somebody's just running on the basis of, I want to get rid of the fire department. Would this prevent our firemen in their, say, off-duty time from saying, hey, as a fireman, I do not want this candidate in office because I believe it's important to have a professional fire department?
No, I don't believe that it will, because it says, this provision is not to be construed to prevent town employees from carrying out duties and responsibilities of an employee's position, including not limited to, no, I'm sorry, that's not it. It's, service of resources to a advocating on political issues or legislation, or from becoming or continue to be a member of any political organization, from attending political organizational meetings, and it goes on. It gives an exception of an employee's.
Personally, I think there's a huge difference between using the influence of one's employment or office versus simply referencing it in terms of giving weight to a political argument. I mean, like if somebody said, I'm fireman, I'm not going to come fight fire at your house if you don't vote a certain way, that would obviously be very, very bad. But if somebody who has, you know, is engaged in private political speech says, you know, hey, I work for the fire department, I really think this would be a bad thing, I don't think that that should be a violation of the personnel policy. And obviously the same for police or clerical staff or professional staff or anything.
Right. And I agree with you. And I was I can get some more information on this, because that was actually one of the questions that I asked, was that I did not, when this information came in, and let me get some more detail, because I wanted to make sure, and maybe I'm just not reading it right again, that it didn't interfere with a member of town staff to do what they wanted to do on their own time.
And I think that, I think it's pretty clear that they can do what they want on their own time in terms of saying, hey, I support candidate X. What I want to make sure is our staff's not going to get in trouble if a candidate or issue would affect them personally or affect how they perform their job. They would be free in their private discussions, not on town time, not from
Right.
town resources, but in their private discussions with their neighbors and their friends to say, hey, I really think you should consider the ramifications
Right.
of that position.
Yeah, and I'll get the background information from the attorney's office that presented this at the training, and if this completely covers that, so that you have that, but I was assured that the way this reads, it's supposed to.
And I know in the past, this has been an issue that the town of Fairfield has not always sort of gotten a home run on speech policy. So I just want to make sure that we're not going to get ourselves into trouble on that again.
Yeah.
And Christine, do you have something to add?
That's in social media policy under town council.
Right. And I mean, free speech for social media is a very important and emerging issue, but those same principles underlie talking to your neighbors or, residents who say come to speak at a town meeting. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
something that would be important.
It is here, I just missed part of it. So it says, when it starts that this provision is not to be construed to prevent town employees from carrying out duties, responsibilities, then there's a whole bunch of commas and it goes on. Well, after a semicolon, it says, from donating personal time, services, or resources to a political cause or candidate for any county, state, federal, or town elective office, from expressing their views on political matters, or from voting with complete freedom in any election. So it does go on to say that,
Right.
that it doesn't interfere with that.
I just want to make sure that we all would understand that wording to mean that if somebody references their job or how something's going to affect their employment or their job in a private context, that we are not considering that to be
a violation of the
a
personnel
violation
policy.
of the personnel
Correct.
policy. Again, I think there's a big difference between that and then using influence. Like, if you don't vote this way, I'm not going to perform my job.
Right.
It should be obviously inappropriate.
Right. So, and then the alcohol and drug piece is afterwards, and it puts, so this CDL alcohol and drug testing procedures were actually in, just simply in our public works contract, and they were never in our personnel policy at all. So that incorporates them into our personnel policy as well as the required legal provisions for the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act. Also, some changes of the smoking and tobacco use, clarifying on town property, some protected information that we need to put in. Evidently, there was a very big issue that came up regarding service animals, and how a municipality was able to handle that. So there is a section in here on pets that deals with that. So this was generated from a municipality who had an individual that had worked for them for a while and shared working space, and got to a point where they needed a service animal, and come to find out the co-workers were actually allergic to that service animal. So it was, how were those accommodations made, and how was that handled? So this was created because of that. So that's a new section for us. It's not that we have an issue, it's just being proactive. And then that was it. That was it. So it's not a lot, but it definitely was a good going over and thorough review to bring some items more current, and to make sure that this isn't a document that just goes on a shelf that we forget about.
there anyone want to add anything or any further discussion? So with respect to the insurance buyout, are you looking for a proposal from us as to what we want to see for a number, or do you have ideas that you want to bring back to us?
Well, and I was thinking that we could bring some ideas back to you, and some implementation timeframes and some backup documentation from the research that we have collected and those sort of pieces, and we can just have that conversation.
All right.
Okay, so we can bring that section back next meeting.
Right, so do we want to put this on the agenda for next meeting? We'll bring the insurance numbers back and then tentatively schedule to take a vote on the amendments?
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
So,
The next item is number 5, discuss the Water Street land sale acquisition, map 18, lot 75.
so,
Right some time ago, council had discussed the fact that the gentleman that lives next door to the property, which is just out here to the side of the community center, beyond the tree line for the playground, would like to acquire some additional land to square off his property. Council was willing to entertain a request and asked that they put something in writing. So they have requested for that parcel, which would be measured, the measurements are listed there. It's a small piece directly behind their home. It's basically 100 by 100.
plus
And plus, I think it's
70 by 30.
Yeah, I don't think that's a 1. 70 by 30
Yeah.
on the tree line.
Mhm.
From the property, he is offering, not knowing the property's value, $3,000, and would appreciate your consideration. One of the things that this did not have that I think any purchase that we do would require that the individual pay for the new survey, the new pinning, and property description.
Mhm.
My conversations with the tax assessor is that without doing an official survey, this cost is not out of line, it's not extremely low. She was going to be following up with him to let him know that if he was to go forward and council was to approve this, that more than likely the survey, the pinning, the property description would be a requirement for him at his cost.
Yep.
So basically, I think what he would be looking for would be something acknowledging the fact of what his request is at, and that it's similar to basically what we just did on the Sturdivant property, and if you do A, B, and C, then we'll do. So,
Well, I think probably before we don't want to put the cart before the horse by saying like, hey, we're going to commit to that before we know that he's in it as well. Just from my point of view, I think I'd like to see the response on, hey, if you are responsible for these other costs, does that change the equation?
okay.
And then we could, once we know that answer, I mean, we could either, if he says no, we don't have to put it on the agenda for the next meeting. If he says yes, then we could discuss that further at our next meeting.
Okay, that works. We can get that clarification
I'm
done.
sure we'll get it taken care
Yeah,
of.
we can probably bring something up for him and see if we can't get him to sign that.
Yep.
That works for me.
Okay.
Perfect.
Number 6, to discuss streetlight conversion.
Which is that.
Yes. We've had conversations about this multiple times.
Yep.
And now it's about whether or not we would like to go forward with doing this with a couple of different options. One, what you have in your packet is actually very small when it comes to the spreadsheets. But it's using our number of streetlights in 2 very different packages. One is that They would not be the smart technology, so they would not be networked to each other, they would just simply be converted. And then another is with the smart technology in the conversions. We do include our net book value with CMP and what that would cost us, which is gonna be $38,019 to buy out. We would, and then to do the install. So we're projected to save almost $60,000 a year. So that's basically, depending on which project you go with, anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 years. The Public Works Director and I have met with Affinity, and they are the ones that are doing the conversion project in Waterville. They're doing Gardner, they're doing quite a few at Chelsea, I believe, and they also just recently did, they're still working on the conversion in Augusta. So fortunately, some other municipalities spend an awful lot of money on advertising and RFP proposals that they sent out. Their proposals comply with the requirements of everybody in the region and state law. We were offered the same exact price that the city of Augusta was given. So what we have opted not to do is not put out an RFP and go through that expensive process, saving us the advertising costs, because another municipality has done that. It's an unusual situation considering the amount that this is, but I have talked to many managers in the region that are using these folks, and it is confirmed that these numbers are the same exact with everyone. So what folks are using. So if we do this conversion, we have a couple of different options. I have checked with our auditor. We've compared our charter and the ability for us to use funds for this purpose. This is not a general operating budget piece, which is the only thing that goes to town meeting, only our annual operating budget. I would like to see us loan ourselves the money as opposed to taking out a bond and paying interest. We have a couple options we could use, which is you have the ability to use some capital reserve account money to fund this project, and then what we would do is with our savings annually pay those accounts back. We also have the CD from PERC, which I would be more inclined to favor us actually using. That CD will be coming due, I think it's the end of this year, and it will generate roughly $28,000. It's over a $500,000 CD. We took the money, there's no penalty to withdraw from that. We'll earn slightly less. But if we withdrew from that CD to use it to fund this project, and then we continue to budget annually what our streetlights normally would have been, that difference of what we save would be used to go back into that CD account to protect that going forward. It's interesting enough that the CD stems from the money that we received from our capital investment in PERC, which was Penobscot Energy Recovery. And the fact that we would be using that money towards an energy efficiency project, I think is definitely in keeping with how things were done when we set that up in a designated revenue account. So just looking for some direction from council. I don't believe, what we would recommend is that we would use the smart technology in the areas in which we can. These lights have to be able to see each other in order to talk to each other. They come feedback to a software system that would let us know when a light is out and exactly where it's located. They'll let us know what our electricity usage is in every location. It gives us the ability to dim lights in locations.
Does it have that little beepy thing?
Beepy
When you pull up to it and it'll make a little beepy noise like they do in Waterville?
No, that's the crosswalks that do that. This is for the actual street
I know
lights.
something beeps and it
Yeah,
drives
it's the
me out
crosswalks.
of my mind.
It's the crosswalks that do that. So it'd
Okay.
be the actual streetlights. We do have some locations where the smart technology is not going to work. The lights are going to be too far in between. So like out on the corner of 139 and 104. That's not going to talk to another street light here in town because it does have to be an internet connection. But our in-town lights would be really good. The software system keeps track of our usage. Like I said, right now, streetlights are built simply based on an average time frame that it has appeared that they would be on during a particular time of year based upon the wattage of the light. There's legislation being drafted that actually would get us metered for streetlights, which means we would probably pay an awful lot less than what we're actually paying for that electricity usage.
Good.
The other great pieces of this, so the lights are completely guaranteed for their first year, 100% warranty. It's a local company that would be working on these. They have a zero waste business plan. They're constructed right in New Hampshire. They use a lot of military vets to go through this process. They ship everything in plastic reusable containers. They're basically louvered shipping containers, everything comes in, and then they go back with them. They would be responsible, this cost includes the purchasing of our current lights, the removal and disposal of all of our current lights, and the installation of the new lights. There is a possibility that some of these numbers will change. There's a step in their process where they'll come in and they'll do an official inventory of their own. Their numbers are based upon our inventory that we did from our CMPPs.
So these new lights, the LED ones, are they engineered to try and avoid light pollution, keep the light going down and not up?
Yes, so they're full back cutoff lights, so that you might have a street light in front of your house right now that shines in your living room window or bedroom window or what have you. These new lights do not. They come straight down, and there's very little light spillage on what would be like the backside of a sidewalk.
I think people would be surprised to know perhaps that in the last 10 years, the greater Waterville area has become one of the most light polluted places outside of a major metropolitan area in the country.
Yeah.
The actual astronomers organizations and wildlife conservation organizations have been raising the alarm about the encroachment of light into dark sky areas in our area in particular. So if this can help stem that tide as well, I think that'd be very important, both for scientific reasons and for human health.
We had a lengthy conversation when the representative came to meet with the Public Works Director and I, from prior years' conversation about streetlights and those sort of pieces as we've worked on this project, knowing that the light pollution is a very big issue for us. We know that we have people who work shift work, and changes in ambient light can make big differences. So is it the right kind of light? It's not the blue light. It's not light that's not conducive to sleep patterns, and I forget exactly where they are, but they're where they're supposed to be. Also, quite frankly, lightning bugs are becoming extinct. So because everything is too dark, so it's making sure those are staying fine. If you take a dollar bill now and you put it on the grass under a street light, it'll probably look yellowish orangish. With these lights, it's pure light, so it does actually look like a dollar bill. They did come and give us a demonstration to us, and like I said, I do know for a fact in Augusta, on the Coney side of the Kennebec, they're pretty much converted over there. So if anybody has a chance, and I'm sure there's a lot more, but that's where I knew they were at before. They'll be willing to come and give a full presentation to the council if you so wish.
I would very much like to hear from them.
Yep.
Do you know when they would be available to do that?
So I will reach out to them if that's your wishes. I will reach out to them, and I actually would like to try to see if they have the ability to come to your next meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
You could let us know as soon as possible, because I would also like to try and make a push through our social media and other avenues, get the public's input on this. I think it's a hugely important issue for the public to be involved in. It's a major infrastructure project, it's a major capital expense, and I think that public buy-in is the key to making this a successful project. And so I'd like for the public to get a chance to hear the presentation and ask questions as well.
Perfect. So we could, I could potentially have an answer by tomorrow, but definitely by the 1st of next week. Schedule it similar to like what we did this evening at the top of the meeting, have them give a presentation, and know that we'll allow time for public feedback. And as soon as we know that, we can make a big push for that.
And if we could see if the company would even be willing to take questions from the public, not just from
certainly.
us. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that would be that'd be a very important thing. I mean,
They'll probably have a lot of questions too, so it's a good idea.
Perfect. We could. Right, wonderful, we'll get that done. Hopefully next meeting.
is there anything else on this topic?
No, not for me.
All right, in that case, we're going to move on to discuss other council business. Mr. Lawrence, do you have any other business today?
Okay, I was handing something the other day from the Grange.
Okay.
It's about window dressers. They have an activity this fall. So if anyone from the Fairfield district wants window inserts, call Barbara at 453-9476, or go to the website, the email address, windowdressers.org, to make arrangements for a fitting. And also too, since it's the summer heat has come to us, finally, after all the rainy season, but with heat, there's heat injuries too. So just watch your neighbors, especially the elderly and the seniors. Check on them once in a while, see if they need anything, especially water. So just be a friend. So that's it.
Thank you.
Just to add to that,
Sure.
it's not just the elderly and the disabled, because I had a spell today when it was so hot, and I had to flush my system because I almost passed out. So it isn't just the elderly, it's, you know, it's anybody. If you don't hydrate, you end up with problems. So just bear that in mind. It could be anybody just keeling over from excessive heat or not hydrating properly. We all forget.
Any other business tonight?
No.
I don't have anything else tonight.
So I just wanted to very briefly go back to the cell tower issue. I know we informally, sort of took a quick poll and, be very clear for people at home, not unanimously decided to authorize further discussions. I just want to make it very clear that this is not in any way outside of the normal process. That we are still, planning board's still going to go through the process of making sure it complies with zoning and all those things, and we will have further discussions and debates once we have a fuller understanding of what this agreement would entail as well. And I don't expect that anybody sitting around this table today would feel any pressure to support the project in the long run simply because we decided to open a negotiation.
Oh,
No,
I don't.
no,
And I think
I
that,
should, yeah.
I just want people at home to know we're really just having a discussion, and
Right.
there's a lot that goes into it, and it's the public's land, and I would hope that the public would come forward and let us know what they want to do with it, because ultimately it's up to the public what we do with public land. So I want to make sure that people at home know that there's no push for this particular project. It's simply an option that we're exploring. And anybody have any other business? Seeing none, the next regular meeting of the Fairfield Town Council will be on Wednesday, June 26, 2019. At this time, I will take a motion for a recess.
So
Motion.
moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no one opposed, we are in recess.
Good.